we're live. This is another episode of Austro Thomism. We got regulars, Pinecast, Belkov, and we got a guest tonight. We have Gold Guy. So we're going to discuss Ayn Rand's Virtue selfishness. It's going to be great. How y'all doing tonight?
Doing good. How you doing, Caleb?
Doing great.
Yeah, same here.
Hard, but I'm ready to get into this.
I'm ready to get ganged up on.
Gold Guy is the you are the first. You've only had two guests. First atheist on the podcast, I believe. And were you ever like a full blown objectivist, or did you kind of like always have like political power in this plan? I know you guys are you're an anarchist, so we're similar to lines. What was your split with Rand exactly?
I was never a full blown objectivist. I was very objectivist adjacent. I was really the whole beginning of my journey into libertarianism and the right wing in general. Because I read Atlas Shrugged. It took me a few months to do it, and just fucking blew my mind.
Yeah, it's pretty good. Okay, well, so I missed it. There's the title. It's Ayn Rand the Virtue of Selfishness. Before we get into it, I want to bring up that Ayn Rand is famous for her writing people out of a movement. I've heard stories that apparently objectivist weekend seminars, there'd be teachers scheduled to teach the next day, and people would wake up and they were gone, and no one would explain where they went. Very Soviet of her.
That's the Soviet instincts kicking in. Very talented, Miss Rand.
Her introduction is about how
secret police officer.
An introduction about how she runs a magazine, and she has this book, and then she's very involved and helped out a lot by Miss Anna Brandon, who seems great. And after the introduction, it was in September 1964. This is P.S. The Sandra brand is no longer associated with me or my philosophy. New York, November 1970. I love the introduction hit home exactly the kind of person I thought Rand was.
This is going to be pretty interesting. I've just started looking into Thomism. I'm not even a very good atheist because I'm honestly questioning right now. I've just been through the unmoved mover argument. So
would that be the actual potential argument?
Yeah.
With that? Oh, okay. Yeah, because there's similar ones which are almost identical, like the essence existence one, which isn't technically movement, but it's pretty close. Yeah. Also from Aquinas.
I get the unmoved mover and the argument from motion. Sometimes confused. And I think it's I know a lot of my friends I talk to, they conflate the unmoved mover and the Kalam cosmological, because I said one says cause and effect, one has potential and actuality, and they say there's no difference between the two, and then it's like they say the same argument, and it's different arguments.
He does a really good job of demystifying this, because he does, and Bahitan does as well, but in a really obscure way, so you have to really read him carefully. But Phaser is, a clear writer. So he very clearly says, I'm not talking about a causal time series. I'm only talking about a hierarchical series. So, like a cup stands on a chair or on a table. Table stands on the ground or on the floor, which stands on top of the ground. That's a hierarchical series. And he talks about this is not necessarily in time. It's just an example of what it would look like.
We got a comment from I Wait Libertarian. I gave him my Bible on Saturday. Now he's on a Thomas podcast.
Moving fast.
Quick work.
So something I want to get into a little bit, because we mentioned Aquinas, and Rand has the quote that I have bastardized a couple of times, but love, that the only philosophers worth reading are the three A's: Aristotle, Aquinas, and Ayn Rand. So and reading her, the Aristotle and the Aquinas clearly comes through. But we talk about, she has or Aquinas has these, I think, just beautiful proofs of the existence of God, and goes into incredible detail. And I've heard Rand talk about Aquinas on the proofs for the existence of God in one of her interviews. She sort of, is lauding Aquinas as, no one has ever come this close. He does a better job than anyone of trying to prove that God exists. And then she goes, but he failed, so we're going to sort of ignore all those things. We don't have to take it seriously. And I've never really heard her deal with her issues with those proofs, because certainly Aquinas wouldn't say, "Oh, I got so close." Like, I mean, for him, this was
pretty definitive.
Gold Guy, do you have any idea, or does anyone have any idea what her issues with those proofs was?
I don't know. I'd like to know.
Me too.
I mean, from reading a bit of outside of this Virtue of Selfishness, where she talks a bit about metaphysics and I think objectivist epistemology, she seems to subscribe to a very Aristotelian view of metaphysics instead of scholastic. So she doesn't seem to accept that what the scholastics viewed as some faults in let's say where the forms are, the idea of forms and matter. They where the scholastics sort of had some addendums to make to Aristotle, especially Aquinas. She doesn't really accept that, it seems. She just goes with the Aristotelian version of realism, is the view that it's called, with the Aristotelian realism instead of scholastic. And because she kind of has this fundamental metaphysical disagreement, she's like, okay, the rest is wrong. Let's move on. It's sort of like that, I feel, because I don't know where she has these are the books for the atheist position, which, considering that she's pretty strident about it, she doesn't really set it out in detail. Not even in her novels. There's a lot of critiques of the psychology of mysticism, maybe, or the psychology of blindly bowing down to something, but there's not really a critique of the metaphysics of God.
Yeah, I definitely agree with some of her. She's doing out the neo-mystic aids later in the book.
Mm-hmm. Yes,
I couldn't help but think of Zaydiah when she was Osbros, and how that really is that whole quote, like it was those who don't know can't know kind of thing. Obviously, put it or those who can't know can never find out kind of thing. When she was talking about that, was just like, no, I've had that said to me by people. I asked a question, that was literally the answer. And so when he wears against something, he wears against it correctly. But when he doesn't offer a viable alternative, he falls short. And that's what's frustrating about it. Because he sees he's so good at like responding to everything that's wrong. But it doesn't ever offer anything really that I think is a viable replacement. And I figured you would. Well, I want to get into that a bit later. First, let's kind of go through the book, yeah. So before we get deep into the virtue of selflessness, could someone, maybe one of the Catholic guys, define a virtue? See if we can give it, because I know this is the virtue of selflessness. I figured maybe we should give a Catholic definition of a virtue, or list the Catholic virtues. Because I wanted to do research on them today, but I did not have time that I thought I was going to have, and so I was unable to prep that. So maybe one of y'all can
want me to give a what's the name? A definition from Peter Abelard? If I can find it, I would. I just need to. Somewhere it's buried in here.
Take your time.
Let me see. Yeah, I even have the essay open. I just need to go to the beginning of it. Nice. Yeah, it's all my notations. Where is virtue here? Said vice. Vices. Okay. So let me see. Yeah, he has a whole thing here. He doesn't unfortunately have Okay, so I'll give the basic definition upon which we can expand that Peter Abelard sort of works with. Some vices and virtues are goods of the mind that make a human life deserving of censure or praise. That would be the basic formulation that Abelard works with and that some of the scholastics work with. To get deeper into it, we can define virtue as a good habit that engenders man to achieve his chief end. Now, this chief end doesn't need to be a Catholic end. Peter Geach, a Catholic philosopher of the 20th century, makes the point that the virtues are necessary, the cardinal virtues at least, of I believe courage, wisdom, temperance, and is it not prudence? I forget what it is. It might be prudence. Maybe I'm just stupid.
I think it is prudence.
Yes. Fortitude, temperance. Yeah.
Yes, those virtues. He makes the case that they're needed for any rational end of man. But if one believes, such as the Catholics do, to borrow from the Westminster Catechism, that man's chief end is to glorify God and enjoy him forever, then the free theological virtues of charity, faith, and hope are also necessary for that. So they are the things that are necessary for man to complete his teleology, the habits and what he needs to exhibit.
I think there's a way to read the virtue of selflessness and pull good things out of it. Trent Horn, Trent Horn quoted the book on a Punch of Aquinas one time. He said, Rand had the view that you have to look out for yourself and you have to be selfless and take care of yourself. And Jesus said you have to take care of how do you put it? I'm blanking on a quote from Jesus. I feel terrible right now. I can't quote Jesus. I feel like a failure question right now. I'm drawing a complete mental blank. It's the take care of others as doing others do you know. It's take care.
It's not the golden rule.
Just take care of your neighbor. I can't believe I couldn't
Love
remember
thy
take care of your-
neighbor.
I could not remember love thy neighbor. I am a failed person.
Just give up and become an objectivist, bro.
I'm gonna just quit the podcast. I couldn't remember to love thy neighbor. Oh my gosh. But before you can love your neighbor, you have to be able to take care of yourself. You know, you can't just give everything away because then you have nothing to give. You cannot help someone if you are not existing to actually help someone.
No one can really contribute to, if someone wants to contribute to society, they can't really do that unless they take care of themselves first.
Absolutely.
That's where I think selfishness is, even in a more, as I see it, Catholic mindset. Selfishness is still absolutely necessary to function, to be virtuous, to achieve what you want.
Yeah, I would definitely say self-interest and selfishness are very close, but one is tempered a bit more. Maybe it's just because I'm reading this with a modern lens, but I would say, like, if you say everyone has to have some self-interest to actually take care of themselves, I would obviously agree. When someone says that everyone has to be selfish, it's just like I know what they're trying to say as an objectivist, but I have to remember that, okay, they're basically saying what I'm thinking, but they're using a different word for it. And this is where my problem with objectivism comes in, is that you guys, just so much that they agree on, they just use words a little differently than how I would, and I have to kind of walk through it. And I'm like, okay, this is
Rand actually covers this right at the beginning, doesn't she? When she insists, covers why she insists on saying selfishness to not give in, to not allow her detractors to claim the word and impose their definition of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I will say, I think Rand does this a lot, where she'll have definitions of words that you kind of, I mean, she's very clear about what they are, but you can kind of quibble about what the definition of a word like sacrifice, when she talks about sacrifice, it's a definition that I think a lot of people would say, it's not quite what I would think you mean.
Yes.
But the other thing with selfishness in general, and she uses it more or less synonymously with self-interest. I think there's not a lot of, she sees self-interest as the thing that you should care about, and she would call that selfishness, like Gold Guy says, because that's what's, she wants ownership of that word. And let's see, there's two points I wanted to make, but the thing I want to focus on is there's very much an idea that being selfish in the sense that she describes can be a very good thing, and being selfless can be a huge negative. I mean, there is the good that is you, and that is a good worth trying to maximize in a vacuum. There's nothing. Go ahead.
No, it's just saying the word selfless actually works for her, because you should have a self. Because selfless seems like you don't have a self to have. And, no, you have a soul. You should try and save it. You should try and, increase its being in measure. And the quote, love thy neighbor, is love thy neighbor as yourself. Will the good of your neighbor, to use Aquinas' definition of love, is to will the good of the other, as you will your own good. So there is really not that much of a conflict in it. If you don't have a self, you can't love. There's nothing to give, and there's nothing to increase your own being in a Catholic metaphysics.
To say I love you, you must first know how to say the I.
Yes, exactly.
Absolutely. That was the I one quote I couldn't think of earlier too. Those are the two quotes I was flanking on: the "I love you" one and the "love thy neighbor" one.
There's a great quote. I can't remember where I heard it from, but it was it's going to drive me crazy. I can't remember the source of this, but it was saying that the most selfless thing you can do would be to kill yourself and go to hell. Like, that would be completely selfless, just abandoning yourself entirely.
Yes, exactly.
And that's not a good thing. Like, that's not something to strive for. There's always the goal should be the good, there's you can do a lot of good by sacrificing of yourself, but just doing bad things to yourself is not an end. Is not a valuable end. there is good to be had in you, and abandoning that is completely destructive and antithetical to life.
I mean, even to take it back to the Catholic point, even if you don't think you're worth saving, in that you want to kill yourself and go to hell, well, God does. Christ thinks you're worth saving. There must be something good about you that maybe you should work on yourself. Maybe you should work on your soul. Maybe you should develop yourself.
Absolutely.
And do you want to go ahead?
No, go ahead.
The other thing, because you say and I agree, there's a lot of good to be pulled out of Rand's work, and I don't think it's just the conclusions. I think when she develops, so for those that don't know, the Virtue of Selflessness is this collection of essays by her and her protege, Nathaniel Brandon, mostly written during the 60s, I think, and mostly published in their various objectivist magazines. But in the first one, the objectivist ethic, where she goes through and lays out, okay, how do I derive my ethic? And she does a very rigorous job of saying, okay, what is, how do we come up with an ethic? What is a moral principle? What should morality look like? And it's all fantastic in my mind. Like, I think she nails it start to finish. And one of the things she does very early on is she's sitting there saying, okay, first we need to know, okay, what is a man? We need to know what a person is, and understand our nature. And that's where moral theories come from, is you say, okay, what am I? And then what is good for me? And then moral theory is just helping you answer those questions of what is good for me. And she even says, like, she just obliterates this so-called is-ought gap from David Hume that says, okay, well, I can know what something is, but that doesn't tell me anything about what it should do or what anyone should do. And she really effectively just demonstrates that that's rubbish. Is if I know what I am, I know what's good for me, and I should do the things that are good for me. And we have a very clear sense of this in something like nutrition. Like I say, okay, I should drink water. I shouldn't drink paint thinner. It's like, well, why is that? It's like, well, one's good for me and one's not. And no one ever accused you of trying to bridge the is-ought chasm in that case. Like, clearly, okay, yeah, that's good. It's when we get into these sort of this other realm of quote unquote moral questions that we start having difficulties. Well, what, how can I say what's a moral good and what's not a moral good? So, I have a nature, and there's things that help this nature to thrive, and there's things that benefit this nature. And those are the things that I should do. Those are the good things. Those are the moral things. And she lays that out so brilliantly clearly. And all that base, I think, is just, and it's from Aristotle, it's from Aquinas, but it's just, it's incredibly well put, and it's just right. Like, she just gets that, she gets those fundamentals very, very well.
Yes.
And that's basically the first essay, which I think is also the longest essay of the book, where she comes to a conclusion. If we want to do the book in order, we might as well start there. That the standard is man's life. That's the standard of moral value, which is a very good standard, I find.
Yeah, and the one quibble I have, and there's the bigger quibble about the immaterial nature of the soul and the divine and all these other things that she just rejects out of hand, which is the sort of bigger issue. But the more direct one that always sort of bugs me, and I make this joke, and it sort of seems true, that I'm not entirely sure that Rand knows where babies come from. And you see this in her essays, and it shocked me reading Atlas Shrugged, which is her magnum opus, where she expands on everything that her philosophy is. And there's like literally one case of like someone having children, like randomly in Galt's Gulch. There's like one woman who's like, she's like the perfect mother, and so her calling is to be a really good mother, so she gets to go to Galt's Gulch. But no one else has kids. Their parents are mentioned, but you never really see them. And it's weird because Rand also has she has a very clear idea about man and woman and their complementarity. Like in Ayn Rand, there's all this, really wild, kinky sex, and she, very clearly has a distinct understanding of the masculine and the feminine, but it's all incredibly sterile. Like, babies never show up. There's never this idea of, and she talks about in her essay, she talks about the nature of man, and never deals with this idea of, okay, one of the things that is not accidental to man's nature, one of the things that is core to man's nature, is you make more men. Like you make more children at some point.
That was one of the earliest things that stood out to me about a potential problem with objectivism. Like, I mean, okay, what if everyone wants to live the life they want and nobody wants children? Might be a bit of a problem there.
No. And go ahead.
No, I was just saying that this also just now came to me. I think the one family relationship that is portrayed in Atlas Shrugged is that between a brother and a sister. It's between the protagonist, I forget her name, and her brother.
Dagny and
Dagny and the loser, whatever his name is.
What about Hank Reardon and his mother?
Oh yeah, that as well. Oh man, and you see, there is no in detail inspection of like a working family or a family that is on stable terms and is not completely dysfunctional. All family members are sort of treated to make this point. She sort of treats men as these free-floating entities, not incarnated, really. Hoppe has the same critique of John Rawls. We're like, no. Men are incarnated creatures in a specific time and place with specific ties. Scruton also talks a lot about this in the nature of the family and the anthropology of man. And if you're missing something in your anthropology, you're going to miss something in all your social theories and in all your political and ethical theories of action if you miss a key aspect in anthropology. Scruton sort of criticized this in the Marxist ideas of society, where okay, you have a neat social theory there. Can you tell me your anthropology from where you derived it from? Because you don't seem to have one.
Wasn't that kind of like the point of your article you published recently?
Yeah, so I put out something recently, and it was not directly tied to this, but it sort of came up as I was thinking more about it, and some various screeching on Twitter about the family and what if it has its own nature or not. But yeah, it's this idea that I think we sort of forget is we'll sort of do in Austrian school, we'll do like von Mises or like Rothbard does and say, okay, we start out, we've got a man, and he's on his desert island and he's trading coconuts for fishing wire or whatever. And you can develop some nice economic theory that way, but that's not how man starts out. You don't just pop into being on a desert island and say, okay, I need to survive. There was a man and a woman, and there had to be one of each, and they came together and they made you. And so you are the embodiment of that relationship. Is that you created that family that has this real unity because you have a real unity. And you can't understand man without understanding that, okay, yeah, man makes more men by having this complementarity between masculine and feminine. They make people; those people make more people, and it's again, it's not accidental to our nature. It is essential to our nature that we are sexual in this way, that we are reproductive and that we're sexually reproductive, and yeah, that Rand can sit there and say, okay, here's all these things about human nature, and therefore the highest end I can seek is my own life, and just completely ignoring the possibility is like, oh, what if I have a child? Like, that's a thing that is in my nature to do. It is proper and correct for me to have children. If it wasn't there, man would not make sense if it wasn't essential to make more people, and to not realize that, okay, maybe my child's life might be more important than mine because my child can then have more children to have more children. It's a weird blind spot, but I think it's a completely physical, just sort of thing that fails in terms of her determining what our highest end can be.
I don't think it's a total blind spot, actually, because she mentioned specifically in love, how one gains pleasure, gains happiness from the happiness of others, of people we love, and can in some ways value that person's well-being above their own, for example, physical well-being, and as being necessary to their own well-being. Like specifically, trying to remember the exact wording, she says that a man could risk his life to save the woman he loves from drowning, for example, if life without her would then be unbearable. Now, you could apply, I think, in some way, you could apply this to children, to even in more mundane situations, not just disasters and drownings, to raising children, taking care of them and making them happy for your own happiness. So she may not have addressed it precisely, but I don't think it's necessarily a total blind spot for her.
No, I was just saying I don't think it's a complete philosophical blind spot, but it's sort of a psychological blind spot. I think probably because of her own life and her own mentality. Because I don't think she had any children, right?
She did not know.
Yeah, she didn't have any children, but she very clearly had a thing. One of the reasons that I liked Ayn Rand, I started reading her, and it's what led me eventually to Scruton, was her view that she had a theory of human sexuality and love and romance. It's what actually led me to her, because Nathaniel Brenn's, it's why my favorite essay in The Virtue of Selfishness is Nathaniel Brenn's essay on pleasure, because it's really, really good. I have it open here. I can quote it later, but it's what eventually led me to Scruton when I was like, okay, where do we go from here then? And is there a more thorough philosophical treatment of this? And there was in Scruton. There was a whole tome of it, in fact, which one day me and Caleb will cover. But yeah, that was one of the reasons I really liked Ayn Rand. So it's not exactly a complete philosophical blind spot, but there's a certain mentality that her and a lot of objectivists, people who class themselves as objectivists, not necessarily people who just read Ayn Rand and like her, but, the Yaron Brooks of the world, the people who take her tone of voice and speak in her same style, there's a sort of very weird psychological blind spot of why humans have families a lot of the time and why we like our children. Not necessarily a philosophical one that you can't derive from her system.
Anybody have anything more they want to add on the first chapter? You guys get to move on to the second chapter.
I mean, the first chapter is really her very beautiful derivation, as Ayn said, of the standard of man's life, or the standard of moral value is man's life, and what's good and conducive to it, or what is not. If you actually want more philosophical grounding for it, you should read Aquinas, as she said, where he establishes a very teleological view of the nature of the world. But yeah, what is the second chapter actually? Let me open it up.
Mental health versus mysticism.
Oh,
and
yes.
Self-sacrifice by Nathaniel Branden.
Mm-hmm.
I was just going to add on the idea that man's life is the standard. This was when I read Rand. When I first read Rand, I was quite lost. I had no idea what was right or wrong, or if there was such a thing, and I had no idea. I felt like there was no purpose, and I was having trouble dealing with that. And then just suddenly have it laid out so simply, like what's good for you is morally good. I was like, oh fuck, okay.
Yeah,
so that's what I was missing.
absolutely.
Cool.
And sorry, Caleb, we're gonna end up spending like half the time on just on the first 30 pages out of the 200 or so.
No, it's perfect.
That's fine. Take your time.
I think we mentioned earlier that her critiques of the way things are in society are just so spot on, and she talks about this culture of altruism, and again she uses words in a very particular way and wants to try and be a little inflammatory, but I think something that she does really well is she sort of perceives a lot of what's actually going on better than the people that actually practice this system really understand. Is when she talks about altruism and say, okay, people are the goal is to give to those who are the most worthless, and to give and to take from those who have the most. And no one really would admit thinking that way, but there's a lot of truth to that. There's this one, we don't have this sort of fundamental grounding that she goes through to understand, okay, why should we have the morals that we have? But then the one that we end up with is one that doesn't make a lot of sense. And if you try and articulate it well, like she does, it looks insane. And that's why no one really ever tries to articulate it very well, or they try and couch it in other terms. So I think, I would quill a little bit about what she calls altruism or not, but the ethic that she's railing against, I think, is pervasive, and is one that, like Golga said, is very destructive, because it leaves people not thinking that pursuing their own good is moral.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
I think I listened to most of the book yesterday after work. The first chapter I listened to at work yesterday, and I don't remember any of it. Exactly why I don't have much to add. I remember bits of it. I remember, oh yeah, that was in the first chapter, but I'm actually not remembering much of the first chapter. I will say one of the things that I did remember from is what you on. Someone keep going. I'm about to sneeze. I'm going to mute my camera.
I'm going to piggyback off a little bit what Caleb was saying. It's something that I've noticed, and it's because it's a very it's rationally based. The fundamentals are in place. The objective ethic is very consistent, and there's a whole to it. So in my mind, looking back at the chapters, a lot of them run together, because you don't have to really pull anything out of left field to address an argument. Like there's a particular question that comes up, a crucial argument. It's like, okay, well, what does the ethic actually say? And so there's the chapters can kind of blend together for me a little bit, looking back to what was in this one, what was in this one, because there is a coherent whole. Like the ethic has a very coherence to it, which is a really good thing, but it also makes it very difficult to differentiate. Okay, what was this point versus what is this point? It's okay, well, this is our ethic, and how do we apply it in this case?
I would say one thing I remembered from the first part of it was she mentioned I can never say the word
teleology.
Yes, thank you. My tongue does not want to work for that one word. See, it doesn't seem to believe in teleology. All right. For people, but not necessarily for like an object. An object doesn't have a. This was one of the footnotes he had. Am I just remembering that wrong, or was that something he said that there's not a teleology for like inanimate objects, only for people?
Ooh, I didn't remember that.
I remember what you're talking about. I'm trying to find that quote real quick, or that footnote. What she basically says is she just sort of ignores the idea of teleology, but I think I don't know if she sort of uses a slightly different definition, because she's talking about what essentially it seems like she's talking about what the end of man is, and decides that it's his own his own life.
Oh, I have it here. I have the footnote here. I can read it out if you guys want. Okay, so when applied to physical phenomena, such as the automatic functions of an organism, the term goal-directed is not to be taken to mean purposive, a concept applicable only to the actions of a consciousness, and is not to imply the existence of any teleological principle operating in insentient nature. I use the term goal-directed in this context to designate the fact that the automatic functions of living organisms are actions whose nature is such that they result in the preservation of an organism's life, which seems to be weird, because if they result in the preservation of an organism's life, then surely that's their purpose, right? Like, you seem to be it seems to be a really weird quibble, partly because maybe this is too much of a scholastic view and she doesn't want to give ground to it. So she's like, no, I'm speaking only about humans. You know, the nature of an oak seed is not to grow to an oak tree. I'm not talking about that. It's so that was the foot.
It was teleology is a very big part of my reading. I think a lot about like politics, people's teleology and that kind of stuff. And when I was reading several essays, and it seemed to make the case to me, at least, that men don't have a teleology, but they have value. They have to seek out the value of, like, for preserving their life, and that a man's nature is to, like, discover what is his purpose, what is his goal, what can pursue his life, and he has to rationally, selfishly pursue that kind of thing. It seems like he wouldn't just reject teleology, because if it was a teleology, you could create a objective ethic that, how do I put this?
It has metaphysical grounding. It seems
pretty
somewhat
much
arbitrarily chosen.
Yeah, kind of.
Yeah, that's kind of also. I didn't notice that the first time I read, because again, the first time I read, I think in more or less the same position as Gold over here. I was an atheist. I hadn't yet reverted, so it was sort of like, I don't see why that's exactly a problem. And now reading more scholastic, I'm like, no, that does seem to actually, be counterintuitive to your project, that things don't have an inbuilt purpose to them. Because if you're saying it's only consciousness, then I can surely choose to be self-destructive, and that's my teleology. Instead of my life, I can choose to destroy my life. So it seems to be somewhat counterintuitive. I'm sure an objectivist can give me like a good reply, and that actually it's coherent, but it's counterintuitive at least.
Well, we have an objectivist here. We have an objectivist, or objectivist adjacent. Not putting on the spot, go, guy. But do you have a? Do you see what we're saying? Do you have an agreement, disagreement? Like, what do you think of this whole teleology? Teleology.
Yes.
Can you quickly give your objection again? I was just looking at my cat over there.
Sure. No, that's fine. So my objection is that she seems to be arguing against the notion that teleology is something inbuilt in all things.
Let's define teleology for the audience, just in case people don't know what that is.
That's a fine cat there.
Yes.
I'm being distracted now. Sorry, go ahead.
But I guess, how would I define teleology? Teleology is basically a fancy Greek word for purpose. That's how I would define it if asked on the street. I'm sure all of you neo-Aristotelians and scholastics are screaming at me from wherever they are at the moment. But that's the common sense definition. Yeah, from a lot of them were successful Catholic philosophers. We shouldn't besmirch their good name. But yes, basically. So it's a fancy Greek word for purpose. So when I say that everything is teleological, I'm saying that everything has a purpose. For example, if I say the teleology of an oak seed is to grow into an oak tree, I'm saying that's the purpose. It's inbuilt. It's there from its very nature. It's part of its essence, to use the Aristotelian term. It's part of its essence as an oak tree to grow into an oak seed to grow into an oak tree. Let's not get the causation reversed here. And despite the fact that most seeds never grow into trees, that's their purpose. The statistical fact that something like 60% of seeds are wasted. They never find the correct ground to land in, and so that they can take root. It doesn't matter. That's their purpose. Henry Veitch, a Catholic Thomist philosopher, would also argue. He uses this example of the oak seed, and that the purpose, and that it's a part of the essence of water when it's uphill to run downhill, stuff like that. And so she seems to say that it's not applicable to anything non-sentient. But if it's not applicable to anything non-sentient, then it doesn't seem to be built into the essence of things. So it can't be the essence of man is to preserve his own life, because he could consciously choose to not preserve it. So it's essentially, it can't make an argument against her arguments against self-destructive behavior then only become, if you accept that man's life as his value, which 99% of you will, then my ethic applies. But that 1%, well, you're lost. I can't help you. Like, you're done. There's no argument I can convince you because because at that point it's to use the word she would hate, subjective. That would be my quibble, if one could describe that as a quibble with her, with this specific idea of purpose in Rand.
It's kind of, I mean, it is a weird take from her. The purpose, like an oak seed, the purpose of an oak seed is to grow into a fucking oak tree. It's self-evident.
Mm-hmm.
Then again, there's probably some objectivist out there that will see this and will come and will fucking hunt me down and murder me. But
I'm the one who raised the objection. Don't worry, you're safe. I'll be your scapegoat.
Thank you.
But
he's
yes,
gonna get right out of movement, guys. Goldguy's getting right out of movement. He's gonna be unpersoned by Rand's ghost.
But yes. Is that all the comments we have on chapter 1?
I want to say he mentioned Aristotle in the first chapter and how he based his ethic on watching what rich people did, kind of thing. Like he watched what the upper class of society did, and based his ethic around that. I would say one thing I don't know a whole lot about Aristotle. I went with a few things of his, but I would say his stuff on the golden mean and his I can't remember I can't pronounce the word. Is that his
Nicomachean ethics.
Nicomachean ethics is that there's a golden mean between things. That's quite the same thing. Was that you can go too hard on one thing and it becomes bad. You can go too away from something on the same hand. I can't remember the words he used honestly, but there's a golden mean in between excess and total ignorance of the thing. I guess I can't think of the words for it, but I didn't see anything like that at least in the first chapter. At least maybe I missed it later, but I didn't see anything kind of like a golden mean in between things. It's very much rationally pursue your own self-interest for your value. There wasn't seem to be any golden mean or temperance of how would you make an argument that you should not fuck over other people if your only purpose is to be. You can say that would be bad for you because it would detract a value from your own kind of thing. But that seems like other people would have a value over you kind of thing. I don't maybe I'm reading it wrong, but I didn't see any.
I think she quite clearly says that you don't achieve your own good by fucking over other people.
Yeah. I see that part. I don't see that part. But how would you? I don't see an argument for that from at least I don't see a clear argument from that from objective ethics.
I think I don't know if I don't want to steal Gold Guy's thunder because he's our guest. I don't want to just talk over him, but yeah, I think you can because Brandon at least because I was reading it before we came on. He says an individualist is someone who respects reason, and reason endows man with rights. So you have to if you're you want to live according to reason, and it's the thing that will preserve your life, then you can't fuck up other people because that's a compromise, essentially. That's a compromise on principles, which is the worst goddamn thing you can do. You're basically a monster now if you compromise on principles. So you shouldn't do it, so don't do it. Damn it.
The point later on to compromise the principles that I definitely want to get into because I thought she was great on that.
Yeah. And related to that point, you're talking about the gold mean, Calvin, is the one place the gold mean doesn't and shouldn't apply is in terms of the good. If you have certain properties, you can be more of one thing, but the more good is always better. There's no golden mean between being and not being. There's no golden mean between good and evil. So maximizing the good there is always going to be the best. Go ahead, Goldgov.
No, it's just a lot of modern Aristotelians. They don't talk about the golden mean that much because it seems it's counterintuitive to most modern people because they think you can't be too courageous, right? It's like, yes, you cannot be too courageous. You cannot be too wise. It's that courage is situated between two things. But as courage is a good virtue, you can't be too much of it because it's also context sensitive in the sense that you can become reckless or stupid. Like it's so it's all because wisdom, you can't just be wise. You can't be a wise man acting stupidly in a stupid situation. Essentially, you can't be too wise because all these things depend on our context sensitive. They're not just blank slates that you can insert in any situation, and that situation will now engender wisdom and courage. So I don't actually view it as a criticism of Rand that she doesn't talk about it because I don't think she needs it.
Yeah, that's when most people I know bring up Aristotle. They bring up the golden mean, and so I figured it might be something to bring up people who might read this book and like, where's the golden mean stuff? Where's the temperance of things? Because I was I made a mistake of scrolling the Reddit boards. Exactly. This is I first found out about Hans Hermann Hoppe as a libertarian Reddit board, and they call him a Nazi, and so I didn't read him for like 2 months. I didn't know when it was like all leftist, but I was reading some like there was some leftist Aristotelians who were like critiquing Rand, and this is one of the things they brought up. And I'm like, this might be something that was big enough to the group to see what a good objection or a good answer to their kind of objection is, because I don't see any leftist watch anything I do on YouTube. Thank God. But just in case one stumbles across the video kind of Austro Thomism Ayn Rand book,
and he decides to watch until the 35-minute mark. He's like, okay, I've had enough of this. Now I'm gonna write an angry comment.
No, people are gonna start putting the clips for. We're gonna have clip shows when they're trying to cancel him all these horrible things that he said, and they start scouring his videos. The goal is to get you that big, Caleb. We'll get you there.
Yeah,
we'll get you a hate following yet.
Yes,
I would love a hate following. I would have so much fun with these people.
Okay. Actually, we don't need to do it in order. Do you guys want to do chapter 2, or you want to skip ahead? Depends on what you guys have to comment, because I don't want to just waste Gold Guy's time on comments that he has on parts which he doesn't want to comment on. So it depends on what Gold and you, Caleb, want to talk about.
I got nothing on. I wouldn't have anything on the second chapter too much. I think we kind of covered that with the self-sacrifice stuff from earlier, and I'll miss some comments. Most of my comments are from like later in the book. I have more comments on that stuff, but the earlier stuff, I kind of agree with a lot of it. Yeah,
chapter 3 is ethics of emergencies, where she sort of I didn't reread this one, but if I remember correctly, she sort of makes like, look, extreme situations are extreme situations. You shouldn't derive a whole ethical system out of them, which is a very like a common sense. It's like it's almost something like your mother would take you aside and say as a child, like you should be careful not to take to extremes.
This actually reminds me of now I don't want to sound like the whining leftist, but this reminds me of an argument I have with my father a lot on
that was a good one.
But so here in the UK we have a National Health Service.
Oh yeah, I know.
Absolutely fucking atrocious. It's cancer. It's cancer in administrative form. But my dad is a staunch defender of the NHS.
Oh, yeah.
So I tell him, I mean, he's pretty fucking blue-pilled, neo-lib type. But I tell him that privatized healthcare would be more ethical, more efficient, cheaper. But then he immediately says, okay, what if a bunch of children get lost on a mountain? And they need to get rescued, and no one's willing to pay for a helicopter to rescue them.
Fuck them kids. Fuck them kids.
My response is, do you realize how deranged you sound? Do you realize how stupid this situation is? Number one, people are a lot better than you give them credit for. There will always be people willing to pitch in and either pay for a service or provide a service for free to save, for example, children in need. Number two, they probably think about money later. But he always he immediately jumps to ridiculous situations, like what if a penniless homeless guy breaks his leg, right? Or what if a dope addicted dwarf or a crippled lesbian?
Well, talk to him about Catholic charities and Catholic hospitals.
What about charity? And he just shrugs that off because he doesn't want to lose the debate.
Maybe one of you guys knows this is true. I've heard apparently that after Hurricane Katrina in the States, some objectivist think tank took out a billboard to say charity is wrong. I heard that.
No, that can't be true.
I don't think that's true, but I wouldn't put it past them because some of them are very autistic. I wouldn't be shocked if that was true. But if it was, then
again, Yaron Brook did defend the bombing of Hiroshima, so.
Another reason I'm glad I'm not actually an objectivist. I mean, that's pretty fucking gay.
Dude,
I want to get on my show.
That was rough.
He's agreed to come on my show once, and then he saw I was Catholic and always spotted my emails again. He was gonna come on to talk specifically about how an objectivist would parent. On whoever's on objectivist parent.
That would actually be interesting.
He agreed it would be interesting. Then he found out I was Catholic and just wouldn't talk to me again.
Oh man,
and so I'm sad because I would have loved to have that conversation.
Yeah, the best thing, the very unfortunate thing about Rand is that she sort of created a cult. I think is so unfortunate.
That is, it's actually a hilarious irony the kind
It's really funny.
the kind of following that she basically pushed, a devoted, slavish cult following of people who are so desperate for her approval that they did not really think about the achievement of their own happiness, about the actual objectivist ethics. They just wanted to please Ayn Rand. That was a fucking religion.
Yes,
Absolutely.
it really was. It's really weird. Again, going back, I think in the show, I don't know if I've said this, I think before the show started, where in the book you'll realize this, and I've especially realized this since I reverted back to Catholicism, that Ayn Rand and Nathaniel Branden will quote Atlas Shrugged and the Fountainhead like Aquinas and Augustine quote scripture to prove specific points. It's on that level where it's really funny to see. It's when I first read it, I was like, oh, this is kind of weird, but now I'm like, come on, man, you can't.
It's a Chad move. I mean,
It kind of is. It's on Rand's part. It is on Brandon's. Is kind of pathetic, but on Rand's part, it really kind of is a Chad move. I have to give it to her.
Yeah.
she's proud of her work. Atlas Shrugged was her magnum opus, and it was fucking incredible. So
Yeah, it was.
I think she gets a pass on that.
Yeah, I can't even blame her that much because Scroon does the same thing in Soul of the World.
Nathaniel Branden, on the other hand, just simp.
Yeah,
he is the objectivist simp. Yeah.
Yeah, he is the stereotypical one, but at least he writes well. I'll give him that much.
Yes.
Again, my favorite essay is chapter, I believe, 5, which is the psychology of pleasure. We want
to go and jump into that a little bit?
Yeah, conflict of men's
remember
interests. I can summarize it, which is, if I remember correctly, conflicts of men's interests is that he doesn't. What is conflicts of men's interests? I forgot that.
So
essay.
actually, I have something to say on this because this is something that Caleb brought up earlier. Talking about the golden mean and okay, what's the line between trying to help myself as much as possible and at the expense of everyone else? And something else I think Rand gets really right is she understands your own good, the good of yourself in beyond. It's not just purely material terms. Like I think there's something she misses, but it's never just like, okay, I want if I'm as rich as possible, then I've sort of self-maximized. It just says no, like my purpose in life, I'm a rational animal. I use my reason to understand the world and to build it and to make it better and to use those ends to further to use those things to further my own ends. And if I'm not doing that, I'm not serving my own ends. So if I'm taking advantage of someone, and she's explicit about this and very condemnatory, is that you're a parasite. You are not even acting as a human being.
Yeah.
If you are taking from someone else against their will, like you are literally not a human being at that point. Because you're not acting. That's not what men do. Men aren't parasites. And so if you're exploiting someone for your own end, that's not actually for your own end. She clearly understands the good of yourself well enough to realize it's not just accumulating wealth. And that was a lot about the point in the I think the conflict chapter is, if we have, she clearly has read her contemporary libertarian associates to well enough to understand private property and say, okay, if property is distributed well and we don't take advantage of one another, we don't really end up having conflict ever because there's maybe what I want and what you want, but wants don't really matter. There's what's the good and what serves my good and what doesn't, and those things don't come into conflict with one another.
Yeah, that's basically that's the argument of chapter 4. I reread my highlights. That's basically what she's saying. Is that she's defending the idea that there are no conflict between the interests of rational men. And she's like, well, yeah, like you may want something, but that as a rational man, that doesn't matter if it's someone else's. Like, and if you can't bargain them out of it, well, tough luck. Like, move on. A rational man will either move on or admit that, like, okay, I'll keep wanting it, but not do anything irrational to get it.
I think Ayn Rand, actually, a point that Rand makes that I don't like is that rational men do not desire the unearned. And I disagree with her. Rational men desire the unearned all the time. I would very much like a 1 kilo plate of gold bullion. I just haven't earned it. I want it. No, actually, it's probably more relevant if I think of something that I can't actually.
I want 5 bitcoins.
I want
would be the equivalent of gold.
I want a pet velociraptor, but I'm not going to get it. Am I suddenly irrational for wanting that? For just thinking that'd be cool. I want that.
He has this thing where now I sort of realize where she got it from. She has a very weird definition of rationality. She sort of defines rationality, if you've read modern econ textbooks, like how they define it, as in rationality means never being wrong ever. And it's even more egregious in econ textbooks because because it's like, well, wrong it's wrong or right according to who? Like, who's the judge here? Unless you've like set up
Reality
a
is the
moral.
judge.
Yeah. But for econ textbooks, that's not the judge. I'm saying it's too egregious there. Here, it kind of makes sense. Yeah, man, they're terrible. But it sort of makes some sense here. But it's still a view of rationality that's like, okay, you must always be correct. Whereas the older scholastic view of rationality is that something which can use reason. It's not just someone who's reasonable all the time. So that's I think also, it's not a problem in her philosophy. It's a personal distaste for the way she employs the word rational.
I mean,
And I'll even
she does say that there can be disagreement between rational men.
Yes, she does say
rational men are not always right. Are not actually always right. They just
that's true.
try to be.
That's true. But she has a very strict standard for what it means to be rational, whereas older philosophers would say, as long as someone is like, barring extreme biological or mental issues, a human is always rational. In fact, they'd say to be a person, you have to be rational. If someone is for some reason like missing half their brain, then they're not technically speaking or philosophically speaking a person. They're a human. But not all humans would be persons.
We have the ability to be rational. The issue is using it, and so many people don't.
The older the scholastics and I think the Kantians also use it this way, but I might be wrong. Where it's the other way around. So rational is the ability to use reason, instead of you have reason to be able to be rational, which would be Rand's view, which is a sort of a standard of reason. This other view, which I prefer, this is more of a subjective preference, rationality would be just the ability to use reason itself. But okay, I don't know where we were going with this, but we certainly went somewhere.
Eincast, you have anything to add?
No, I think that's something. Oh, so the one thing I will say, and I will defend Rand a little bit with that statement, and she equivocates in her definitions so much, I think. But she talks about whims a lot, and like these are things that don't matter; these are irrational. And I think she would probably say that your desire to have a velociraptor is a whim. But there's you don't expect to acquire one. You don't expect one to just sort of apparate in front of you. And so the desire would be, okay, it's only a desire if there's actually, you make some plan to actually try and achieve it. And you only try and achieve things that you actually reasonably could do. So I think she probably just wouldn't call your fancies of wanting something to really be. I don't think she would call those desires per se.
Mm-hmm. Fair enough.
So let's move on to, let's skip a few chapters and move on, because we've already gone for an hour, which means it's probably 11:30 for you.
It is 11:24, but I can keep going.
Okay, let's try to get this.
Psychology of Pleasure, then, chapter 6.
Psychology of Pleasure. Let's do that one.
Sorry, my sister was making obscene gestures at me.
As all sisters are wont to do.
Anyway, I can keep going for a while though.
Good.
Okay, great.
So, Psychology of Pleasure.
Yeah, Bulgov, I know you said this is probably your favorite. Do you want to give your sort of summary of why you think it's so good?
Yeah, okay. So it's partly context sensitive in the sense that when I was reading Rand, I was really searching for a philosopher who took pleasure and love seriously, because I couldn't really find it in anyone that I was like interested in. I was Googling it. And while reading Rand in this, I was like, yes, this is sort of what I want. This is definitely in the right track. And I don't know. And that is
I'll be right back, guys.
Really struck me as part of a really, really good application of her system to explain a lot of stuff in real life. And that just how the way the chapter begins is, I believe, okay, let me open it up. Pleasure for man is not a luxury, but a profound psychological need. Pleasure, in the widest sense of the term, is a metaphysical concomitant of life, the reward and consequence of successful action, just as pain is the insignia of failure, destruction, and death. And the way they apply this, the objectivists are very fond of, strict moral judgment, which is a good thing. You should morally judge. You should be prepared. She has a whole essay in this book about not giving up the ability to judge. And because in our culture there's this very strongly socially enforced idea that one shouldn't judge other people's sexual proclivities, this sort of expands into other spheres, but it really starts there. I think that's where people become most offensive. Then, well, the fact that they offer an ability to judge, I think that I can just read the quote you posted, Gold Guy, where I could just, because it's such a good quote. I have it highlighted. So
writing.
So I'll just read it out. Thus, if a man is attracted to a woman of intelligence, confidence, and strength, if he is attracted to a heroine, he reveals one kind of soul. If, instead, he is attracted to an irresponsible, helpless scatterbrain whose weakness enable him to feel masculine, he reveals another kind of soul. If he is attracted to a frightened slut whose lack of judgment and standards allow him to feel free of reproach, he reveals another kind of soul. The same principle, of course, applies to a woman's romantic sexual choices.
Yeah, that was the part when I heard it. I was like, spot on. This is spot on. I heard that. I had to pause. I paused it, listened to it again. I'm like, I'm gonna take a note on this one because that is spot on.
It's so good. It's top tier. It really was.
Yeah, there's a few quotes in this book that are just like top tier.
Really
like,
good.
Was it Grant from Content Taylor today was posting about how he will, if someone asks him for more opinion, he will say something that's evil if it is evil and wrong if it is wrong. And I put the picture of the of Rand's quote on the more greatness of the AIDS, and he's like, "That's good." Like in some ways, I know it's disgusting, but he's right on this.
And getting Grant to like a Rand quote was peak troll. That was fantastic.
I would love to see them. I would love to have them come on and talk Rand. Honestly, I think we could have a great time with them.
And another thing is that they take very seriously the idea of sexual desire. You know, it's not just some arbitrary thing that, you know, is an outside force that enters you and possesses you necessarily. But it's, to quote this, a man falls in love with and sexually desires the person who reflects his own deepest values. And this sort of ties in with Scruton, where he says that love is reason-seeking. But I'm not going to get into that because this is a Rand stream, not Scruton. But it's very, very good. There's a lot of places you can go from there. And I find that it's such a good opening salvo on the idea of pleasure and sexual desire and applying morals to it.
And again, it's so shocking to me again that it's so sterile that you have clearly understands there's masculine and feminine and but doesn't see the end of sex, like doesn't see procreation as an end. And it's just, I mean, and you know, understands this important part of sex, but it's not the essence of sex. I mean, the essence of sex, of sexual desire, of romantic love, of the complementary of the sexes is procreation, and it's just missing. And it's mind-boggling to me that it just isn't like he's writing an essay and talking deeply about the nature of sex and doesn't mention babies ever. It's just shocking to me that this never comes up.
Does not seem to understand the evolutionary purpose of sex, of fucking procreation. Like,
no,
it's interesting.
No, sorry, Gold Guy. No, okay. Oh, sorry, because I was going to bring this up. Scruton brings this up, which is really funny to me, where E.O. Wilson, the famous biologist, really good entomologist. If you're interested in ants, you should read his book on it. It's really good, but only if you're interested in that. But he brings up E.O. Wilson, sort of argues for a free love sexual morality, where he tries to make the argument that evolutionarily speaking, the purpose of sex is pair bonding and not evolution. And Scruton, being a conservative, says, well, if the purpose of sex is pair bonding and not just procreation, then that argues for monogamy because of pair bonding. Like, you realize that, right? And so kind of either way, I think you have it. Either way, if you want to make an evolutionary argument for one or an evolutionary argument for another, or sort of a natural law, theological purpose for procreation, either way you end up at the same space if you accept teleology, which is interesting.
Absolutely. I can't remember, was it this chapter or I can't remember what chapter it was, but he mentioned the hero, the villain, and the anti-hero in modern media. Was it this? Do you remember
no,
what chapter it was?
I felt a bit guilty. That one made me feel a bit guilty because anti-heroes are cool.
Yeah. No, her point on anti-hero, point on villains, the hero has to be like humanized and have like shown to have good motivations and goals. Was I didn't write it down because I was listening to it. I was doing something else, but if anyone has the quote in front of them, maybe Boko has. I don't know if I just searched for it. I couldn't find it. But her point about in today's age, we have to like demonize heroes, and we have to find out most media hero is flawed, has all these problems, while the villain has all these high goals, and he's a villain, but he's a villain for trying to do something that is a good ideal. And the anti-hero is someone who like lacks how's he put it? The anti-hero lacks principles, but it just does whatever he wants, kind of thing. And it was just, I don't know, her entire statement on that really made me think about a lot of made me think about, I looked a while ago. I wanted to see objectivists do more book reviews, because I remember she hated Leo Tolstoy's Anna
Karenina.
Yeah, she hated that book because Ayn Rand did.
Oh,
she hated that. Yeah, she thought it was a terrible hero.
It was Dostoevsky's favorite book, as it happened.
And so it makes you want to see more. And I know Rand hated C.S. Lewis as well, and so it makes you want to see Rand like objectivist literature reviews, because I think they would have very interesting takes on.
She hated C.S. Lewis, really?
Yeah,
the slightest, because C.S. Lewis is all about the things that she's missing from her philosophy. Is that there's something beyond yourself.
Yeah, I mean, if you don't like the New Testament, you're not gonna like Narnia, New Testament for kids. Like you're not gonna get it. I think one of Tolkien's critiques, he didn't like Narnia because it was too allegorical. It was too like there's only one meaning of this, and it's the explicitly Christian one. And he told Lewis, I think, if you want people to read the New Testament, you can just tell them to read the New Testament, and you don't need to write no. You're not gonna do it better. Okay, I found it here. The anti-hero. I don't know if it's the exact quote, but it seems to be. So, observe in literature the emergence of a thing called anti-hero, whose distinction is that he possesses no distinction, no virtues, no values, no goals, no character, no significance, yet who occupies in plays and novels the position formerly held by a hero, with the story centered on his actions, even though he does nothing and gets nowhere. Observe that the term good guys and bad guys is used as a sneer, and particularly in television, observe the revolt against happy endings, the demands that the bad guys be given an equal chance and an equal number of victories. Like a mixed economy. Okay, this is part of continuation of that. But yeah, that was the quote, the heroes and anti-hero quote.
I think it shows a bit of a limited take on what media and fiction should be. I see what she's getting at, but I think her take on art was, I understand it, but I see it as very, very limited.
Yeah. I would say her point on a happy ending. One of my favorite shows, How I Met Your Mother. I'm gonna spoil it for anybody who no one cares. So it ended several years ago. Go watch it if you haven't watched it. It ends depressingly sad. The entire series is about him finding his wife, and it ends with her dying, and him moving on. And it's just a very sad, depressing ending. It was so bad the writers put out an alternate ending that ends at their wedding. Because it was so bad. And everyone was like, the family argues all the time about whether or not it was a good ending. And basically, should characters that you watch have happy endings that motivate you, or should they be relatable or terrible endings like the rest of the world is? Which it makes me sad if people have a view of reality that this has to be a sad ending to be relatable.
I mean, there's also, to bring it back to Christianity in general, but our Messiah did rise from the dead, but he got crucified first. Like, that really, really hurt, man. And our martyrs as well, whom we respect and love, like, some of them were roasted alive, others shot down with arrows, others decapitated. It's like, no, the good guys don't always win, and sometimes they fight a struggle which seems hopeless, but they know it's the right thing to do, and so they do it, and that's okay. And if someone is conflicted, if someone has deep doubts, but at the right moment chooses to do the right thing, even though he doesn't really know why, he just sort of catches a glimmer of the truth and he hangs on to it, that's like also good, even if this person isn't heroic, like doesn't exhibit Herculean strength and fortitude in their character.
Does anyone here watch the TV show BoJack Horseman on Netflix?
I do not.
Yes.
I've heard mixed things about it.
But, yes, except I refuse to watch the last season.
Okay, so I would not make the point I was going to make about BoJack Horseman's ending, because you have not. Have you not watched
Well,
it
he's
yet?
not going to watch the last season, right? You said you refused to.
I should. I really
should.
I really should. I don't know. it's really silly that I have this mental block over a fucking TV show.
About
But
a talking horse.
I have not been able to bring myself to watch the last season of BoJack fucking Horseman.
Okay, well, do yourself a favor and watch it, because I have my critiques of how it ends, but I think the way it ends is the big conversation to have about the show and how it treats its audience in the end. So I want to make my point on that and spoil the show for you, but you should definitely watch it. I guess you were going to say something?
Yeah, I'm reminded a lot about some of the conversation we were having on our roundtable a couple times ago about when we were talking about art. Because I think there is a profound point that Rand is making here, that we've sort of lost this idea of the good and the good.
Actually, her point there is actually really good. We have lost this idea, even if I don't agree with her implementation of it.
Yes, and I think it's so interesting to me because as someone that is, and it's something that's sort of confusing me about her worldview, is if your highest end is your own life. I got bad news about how that's going to end for you. Like, I mean, there's going to be a bad ending. But she sees it's impressive that she sees clearly this really kind of eternal good, that we should have happy endings, because that's the nice thing about being Christian is we know there's a happy ending. Is the story ends well. There might be incredibly bad suffering, and a lot of what we see in media right now sees death as the end, and so you have unhappy endings. And I think a lot of the depressing endings we see is because they don't see past that. And somehow Rand sort of gets a sense that the good guys win in the end. And I don't know quite how she gets to that, because if your own life is your highest end, that's only going to take you so far. There's going to be a bad ending there. So it's really interesting to me that she does see something profound about good triumphing at the end.
Is it a bad ending if you reach the natural end of your lifespan, having achieved what you wanted to achieve and living the happiest life you possibly could? It's going to end. But if you die complete, I mean, is that really a bad ending?
No, that's a good point. But I guess the question is, what's complete?
That brings us back to the teleology
end
of man. I guess the essence and teleology, and if it's just a part of conscious action, then she can't really argue. Then it's weird to argue that if she doesn't subscribe to the view that the essence of man is has an end, that the teleology is to end. If she just argues that it's supposed to be a conscious action which preserves the consciousness, which she seems to kind of take that route, but also kind of not. In the first chapter and in subsequent applications, she sort of deviates from it because she does seem to believe in a very eternal view of the good. So if even I think you'd sort of have to accept a God, not exactly a Christian God, but like a phaser, Thomistic, not Thomistic because Thomas is a Christian, but a sort of a deist God for that argument that there is a good. You don't necessarily need to accept what we Christians take to be revelation in Scripture for that. But I think it's something that sort of misses from her metaphysics as long as she doesn't accept that the essence of the phenomena of biological man is to end. If she doesn't accept that there is a purpose to it. If she does, which many Aristotelian atheists have, then I think she sort of escapes that problem.
I will say to answer, I'm going to point back. You can have a very happy, satisfied, fulfilled life in the end, but there is still an end. And no matter how happy your life is at the end, I think you have to bring in a weird stoicism about acceptance in the end that I don't think Rand has anywhere else in her philosophy. And so it's something that is very innovative. He brings in, like, if you get to the end and you're happy with the life, then you can accept death happily. That seems like a weird, maybe this is stoicism wrong, but it seems like a weird stoic idea that you're just going to accept something that has happening. If your highest value is the perseverance to continue your own life, then it does seem to be like a weird. It's going to be either acceptance of a sad ending or a sad ending. I don't think you can really have a happy death unless you account for something afterwards as a reward or a end point after that. You know what I'm saying? Am I making any sense here? Or am I confused?
I don't know. I feel like, I mean, there's no. So if we take the objectivist atheist view, which I'm not 100% on anymore, we see that there is no alternative to ultimately dying. Ayn Rand makes a big point of alternatives, but in her view, there is no alternative to ultimately dying. So that's going to happen.
It's just something you have to make peace with, essentially. It's like a fact of reality. It's like an objectivist would put it. You have to make peace with reality. You can't ignore it.
And the fact that life ends does not make you a failure at life. You're just going to die anyway. What would make you a failure at life would be to not live well, to, in Rand's view, not live to the objectivist ethics, or potentially be a dope addicted dwarf. Let that one go. That phrase haunts my dreams.
Okay. Anybody have anything else you want to add on the psychology of pleasure?
I'm good.
Are we going to touch any of the political stuff? Because I know there's some chapters here on like rights, collectivist rights.
I'm just going to say one more thing on the psychology of pleasure.
Yep.
I'm not actually entirely sold on the idea that someone who is immoral will not experience proper pleasure, because some people are just cunts, will not accept any argument that they are cunts, and will just continue their lives being cunts and will enjoy them, unfortunately. I don't think that they will necessarily feel a moral guilt or know that they are in fact scum.
It's a good point, and to sort of argue for Randall, because I think there is something to what she says, is that what they might think they're happy but they're not, kind of thing, and it's unfalsifiable to say, like, if I say, okay, well, you're not experiencing true pleasure, but I certainly think that's the way she feels. Is you can be a complete asshole and do terrible things to people. And sometimes I wonder how happy those people actually are, even when they admit it themselves. But you are missing something of joy if you're not working towards your own end. Because she does recognize, okay, we have a nature, and unless your psyche is just completely corrupted, doing things that further that nature should make you feel good. That's why they make you feel good. And I mean, maybe there are people that are so just pathological that they've got those things inverted. But I wonder how far you can take that.
I don't think that they will ever, the type of person we're talking about, I don't think they will ever be as happy as a virtuous person working toward their own ends with a moral awareness. I don't think that these assholes will necessarily be secretly suffering, but they will not be as happy as a virtuous person.
Because then we get into the distinction between pleasure and happiness. Because sure, they can experience sensual pleasure, but it's not the same thing as like the jolly martyr who goes to his execution with a smile. It's not the same thing as someone who's who's sort of very content with his lot and knows that he's in the moral right. It's not exactly the same thing, and then it's hard to describe that as pleasure, but that seems to be what Brandon and Rand want to do.
My ancestors are smiling on the Imperial. Can you say the same?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, I lost so many hours to that game.
But yeah, Peter Geach actually makes the point that a man can be very happy and content with the world and be dead in the eyes of God. He may be completely unrighteous and immoral, and that's just sort of a thing that that he thinks Christians and Catholics should sort of accept, that our lot we're not a prosperity gospel type of guys where if you do good things will happen to you. It's like, no, we have the saints and the martyrs. This doesn't work out that well. So, and the book of Job, things don't work out for Job, and Job was a faithful man if you've read that book. So
pussy. No, disclaimer, I have not. I actually want to specifically read more about Job, simply because of that fucking brilliant scene in Daredevil season 3.
I actually haven't watched Daredevil season 3.
What? Hold on. Bogo, I'm gonna need you to stop all your reading and go watch the greatest Catholic TV show besides the Young Pope. Okay, I'm gonna need you to go enjoy that one. Get back to me.
To be fair, Young Pope kind of ruins itself with the last episode. I find I haven't watched the new Pope, but the Young Pope, the last episode does sort of just brutally murder his character, like in a really weird one episode turn, and whatever. But yeah, okay, I'll watch it then. Because we have to remember, I didn't start watching when I was watching the first 2 seasons. I was not a Catholic back then. I wasn't an atheist exactly, but sort of a deist. But I was not watching it through a Catholic lens, let's say.
There's some great stuff. I watched it again recently with a Catholic lens, and I'm like, this is really good. But anything else on this chapter before we go on to the next chapter?
One last thing I'll say to Golgai's point about immoral people, how they feel happiness. I think there's a very sort of metaphysical idea from man's nature. But if you are acting towards your prop, I mean, Ayn Rand wouldn't talk about, like we said, she doesn't talk about teleology. But if you are acting towards your end, if you are making yourself more, if you are being better, you are there is more to you in a metaphysical sense, and therefore you have the capacity for more pleasure.
Yeah.
If you take someone that's completely immoral, including being selfless, that does terrible things to themselves, the most they can feel is the most pleasure or happiness they can feel is constrained by how much they are. And if you are good, if you're moral, you can feel a lot more.
Assholes, basically, the immoral, as far as I can tell, their pleasures much more momentary, much more fleeting, and they do not feel the same great satisfaction with their life, the happiness that a moral, virtuous person can.
Yeah.
So,
And okay.
fuck
Yeah,
those
no, I was
guys.
just saying that this is a small comment, but she really hates Plato, but her argument is completely Platonic. It's from Plato's Gorgias, where she argues that even an unjust tyrant is not really experiencing happiness, where Plato argues that in the book Gorgias. So I just find that interesting, where it's a very Platonic argument, but she always denounces Plato every time his name comes up. I just find it funny.
Plato
I
was
believe
kind
it's from the Gorgias. I might be totally wrong.
No, there's actually. I think you guys might find this interesting.
Yeah, I believe it's the Gorgias where he talks about the pitiful tyrant. And I forget who. I don't know if this is the famous one where he sort of has the idea. He debates the realpolitik guy that we should just do things to get what we want, no matter like justice or whatever. But yeah, Gorgias, I think, is a book where Plato talks about that. So I just find it funny. So that's my comment before we move on.
Every time someone brings up Aristotle and Plato as like being the difference between them, I always think of a book by Lloyd P. Garrison. It's called Aristotle and Other Platonists, where he argues Aristotle as a Platonist.
I mean, yeah, Kreeft says the same thing. Kreeft says Aristotle is like 90% Plato.
Kreeft's the one who recommended this book. I picked it up. I still need to actually go through all of it. It's very academic, and I have a hard time reading academic books because I don't know any of the languages they refuse to translate. I have a great book by a Catholic guy on Thomas Aquinas on ecstasy, but he only quotes the Summa in Latin and then doesn't translate.
Oh man, yeah, that's a screwed move. I mean,
I guess if you're doing like your dissertation, because it was a dissertation, but he didn't. If you're gonna translate the book you're gonna sell, I feel like you have to amend it a little bit for the popular audience.
Yeah, like Screwed in Sexual Desire, which is like a 500-page book or something. He quotes poems and books all the time. So he'll quote like Proudhon in the original French. He'll quote stuff in the original German. He'll quote stuff in the original Latin. He will not translate it. It will be like 2 paragraphs long, and then he'll continue as if you've understood it because he could speak like 8 languages, including Farsi. So it's just like this ridiculous thing. We're like, no, you will translate this, please. Don't make me go to Google and type a word for goddamn word.
It's frustrating.
When I sometimes in some conversations I quote in Italian just to fucking show off. But that's just me bolstering my own ego.
I know one sentence in Italian, and I use it all the time if I don't want to talk to somebody. Like, no, not a lot of people down here in Florida speak Italian, and so if someone approaches me to speak in Spanish, I'll speak back Italian, and they'll get confused and they'll leave me alone, and it's amazing. I love it.
Okay, next chapter.
Doesn't life require compromise? The next chapter, I skip ahead.
This is I can sum up the basic idea where
before we get into it, I want to say 2 things on it. One, it seems like someone wrote a simple letter to asking us one question: doesn't life require compromise? And she responded with 3 pages of an answer, which seems like a random thing to do, which I appreciate.
It's a very random thing to do. That is true.
I think to sum it up a little bit here was one of the quote from Atlas Shrugged to Bible. There can be no compromise on moral principle, and any compromise between food and poison is only death that can win, and any compromise between good and evil is only evil that can profit. Which I think is absolutely spot on.
He has some amazing quotes in that chapter. I can actually let me see my highlights. But the basic idea of the chapter, if I remember correctly, is that there is compromise in the realm outside of morals and outside of values, because she does think values are absolute. Outside of that, like I can haggle down the price of a thing I want, or I can sort of negotiate with other people, and I sort of negotiate with reality. She doesn't say this, but we can say this in the sense that, like, okay, I'm going to sacrifice some of my time working on this now, and later this thing's going to be done. Or I'm, to use economic terms from Ralph Arbizi, I'm going to engage in a production process and wait until the time of maturity, and then it'll be done, and I'll have the thing I want. And that's sort of a negotiation which I admit, okay, I'm going to do this thing. Reality will give it to me back. I'm going to do this thing for this person, and then they're going to give me something. So I'm going to labor. They're going to pay me wages, or they're going to labor for me, and I'll pay them wages. So that's sort of the basic idea. And she says there can be no compromise on basic principles or on fundamental issues. What would you regard as a compromise between life and death, or between truth and falsehood, or between reason and irrationality? So that's the basic idea of the chapter, I think. I can find some quotes if you guys want, or you can comment on it.
I mean, I think everything that you said was put true and accurate. I mean, specifically, this is one of the parts I was reading this book, and I'm like, I feel like a Catholic could have wrote this, and it wouldn't be much. There'd be a difference in lingo, but I think a lot of it is like, this is a very accurate, correct chapter. I mean, I love the entire thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a lot of the difference between Rand and the Catholics would be difference in terminology and tone. That would be the tendency of it. Not to say that we don't have people that would have our same tone. I mean, the beloved Saint Francis of Assisi was very much a fire and brimstone sort of teacher, despite his very clear love of the destitute and the poor. So yeah, there is that space for that sort of very rough, harsh tone. That, like, look, there are moral things and there are evil things, and you shouldn't do evil things because it's bad. It's really bad. It's bad for your soul, and you might go to hell. Basically, a sort of fire and brimstone approach to that. So there is space for that as well in Catholic circles, but it's not the typical sort of sweet Jesus, meek and mild rhetoric that you see a lot nowadays.
What were you gonna say, Go Guy?
I was going to say it's not entirely clear where Rand draws the line between compromise on fundamental moral issues, bad, and what might be called compromise. Okay, first of all, Rand is not entirely consistent on what she calls compromise. Like I said, it's not clear where she draws the line, where it is acceptable to shift, to move your position, to give something, to ultimately achieve something. Like, it's a bit of a weird one. Like, I started reading The Fountainhead, and then I got sidetracked. I need to actually finish it, but
Same.
To where I've gotten, Howard Rourke seems to be he refuses to compromise on what he wants to build. And he's in a very low position of power, and works for other people. His second kind of employment is working for a huge architectural firm that just plays to whatever is currently popular. And he refuses to do that kind of thing to advance his career, and that leaves me to wonder, like, is he doing the right thing? He's only building stuff that he wants to build, but he is, at this point anyway, he is limiting his prospects to eventually be able to build what he wants to build.
Yeah, I think Michael Malice criticizes this, where this only works because Rourke is Rourke is like a literally heroic figure, because he can reasonably achieve his goals. Problem is, like, no one, like, you're not Howard Rourke, man. Like it's okay to, like, I don't know, if you're a software dev, work in a thing you don't like, or if you're an academic, to write like a paper for sort of the sake of writing a paper, as long as you're not like lying. If you're not doing anything immoral, it's okay to do the sort of busy work stuff to keep going because you need it. You don't need to be this sort of autistic asshole who just does whatever he wants.
I spent 14 months working for Quaker Oats. I made porridge in a factory. I made porridge. I think porridge fucking kills people. Right? If people want to fucking kill themselves by eating porridge, they can do that. I'm at least gonna fucking make money off their corpses.
This might be me, my dumbass speaking. But what the fuck is porridge anyway?
Porridge.
I've only ever heard it in the tree Tree
Charles
Bale's
Dickens novels.
story. I've never actually heard. That's what it is.
It's like grits.
Oh, okay.
It's not quite grits, but it's basically grits.
It's
Right,
like,
I've never
Grits,
eaten porridge.
grits are corn porridge, like
Okay.
oatmeal. You've never eaten oatmeal.
okay, I have eaten oatmeal.
Nope.
It's the same
That's
thing.
porridge.
Okay,
Yes, it's the same.
this is
It's
a
just
British thing. Okay, this is me, my American ass speaking. Apparently, people refer to porridge, people refer to oatmeal. I've never had anyone actually explain to me these are the same thing.
silent colonist.
I learned some in this podcast.
Said the Irishman.
Yeah, Rich coming from the Irishman. Interesting, huh?
Oh yeah, me with Americans. Silence colonist. Me with the Brits. Get out my fucking country.
See, but your point about Rourke, because Rand gets into later, she clearly gets and understands and appreciates the free market and has her very libertarian, sort of minarchist bent to her political theory. But then to sit there and say, okay, like, the market doesn't want what you're offering, but this entrepreneur should just keep doing this thing that isn't particularly like, you can't possibly be okay, I'm providing a good that no one wants. Maybe I should change what good it is. No, it's heroic in this particular case. I see what you're saying about compromise. It's heroic in this particular case to keep providing this good that no one apparently wants, because I know better than the customer what they actually want. It's inconsistent, certainly.
And it's a policy that apply, unless you're a fucking fictional giga chad like Howard Rourke, it's a policy that might stop you from fully living your life. That will actually mess up your happiness, ending up in a pretty blatant contradiction of Ayn Rand's exact ethics. Then again, there seems to be a slight difference between the pure objectivist ethics and Ayn Rand's ethics. Ayn Rand herself was not a perfect objectivist. This is actually a point that is brought up against objectivism, which isn't really fair, I don't think, because Ayn Rand was everyone is fallible, and Ayn Rand herself did not fully live up to her objectivist ethics. That does not necessarily invalidate the ethics themselves. There's other problems with them, but the ad hominem attack of Ayn Rand's own failure is not really a point against them.
I will give this to Rand, though. No one writes Giga Chats quite like she does.
Yeah.
I mean, I think in the first 100 pages of Atlas Shrugged, which you should not read before the Fountainhead. If anyone's listening and wants to get into Rand, read the Fountainhead first. It's because it has a cool villain. In the Atlas Shrugged, it's sort of the world and the government in general, which is a villain. Ellsworth, too, he is actually a really engaging villain because he's not just a victim of an ideology. He knows what he's doing specifically, and he can explain it. And he understands the other side and his own side, and he's sort of really goddamn evil, so he's fun. But she, in the first 100 pages, I think, what's Dagny's first boyfriend? Does anyone remember? Francisco D'Antonia. Yeah. I mean, the way she was describing him at 15 and like the adventures and stuff he would do, I was like, dude, this is like Howard Rourke on steroids. What are you doing?
That did very little. That more than anything, reading about Francisco D'Anconia at 15 made me feel inadequate as fuck.
Yeah, it's sort of like, Rand, please don't. What are you? Come on.
I need to get back into reading Rand's fiction. I gotta get back into. I gotta finish Alice Hook and Fountainhead. I've only ever read her nonfiction.
I'm trying to remember exactly what she said. She specifically addressed the criticism of her heroes being unrealistic. I think something along the lines of it being something to aspire to, and
I think it was something like that.
It being technically possible.
Yeah, I'm not sure the word she uses. I think she describes them as hyper realistic. Like they have all the traits that a great man could have refined to a razor's edge, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
But no, and I speaking about just reading her fiction, as much as we've been talking about like her philosophy and her ethic, I think she is she gets a lot of criticism for some of her the interesting choices she makes in her writing, particularly things like her dialogue. But she is a phenomenal fiction writer. Like she's a talented writer.
I actually really like her fiction. I like that there is a worldview and that characters generally have a worldview. Because even if it's like, okay, yeah, it's not what I would describe realistic because Francisco d'Anconia is not realistic. But, you know, in this fictional world where these are the givens, these are the data, like it makes sense that they act the way they do. Like there's no Ellsworth Toohey in the world. There isn't a man who knows precisely why the collectivist ideology is evil, and that's why he wants to implement it. And he has this very intellectual approach to it, and he knows exactly what he's doing, what his moves need to be to win. There isn't really someone like that. They're more like an Atlas Shrugged, where they're sort of victims of this ideology and sort of just passively accept it. But I really, really like it. It gives a sense that there's an order to her world because it's very detailed, following her worldview. So she sort of shines through the world. Another writer which sort of does this but does it in a realistic way is the Portuguese writer Eça de Queiroz, where you can read it in Primo Basílio or Os Maias, where he has a very specific world, sociological and sort of view of the literal aristocracies of his time, which not the natural aristocracy, but sort of this fading thing which has no moral values, and what the lack of moral values and adultery do to not only this family but to wider society and the relations between the people from different classes. It may sound like I'm describing a Marxist freak, but I swear it's not. But it's really reminded me of that, but without in Eça de Queiroz's world, people don't really know why they do what they do. They just sort of accept it, like the minor characters in Atlas Shrugged. But yeah, so that was the section where we praised her writing of the stream.
There's actually something to point out about. We've gone quite really interesting development of the topic. Something I have not seen in her writing is someone who starts out bad, who starts out evil, comes to realize their errors, and then improves and turns themselves into a good person and a good guy.
Yeah.
We have in I think the closest that I know of, and again I've fully read Atlas Shrugged and I'm part of the way through The Fountainhead. The closest we got was Cheryl Taggart, who suddenly realized and then fucking threw herself off.
Yeah, but she kills herself. Yeah.
And it's not even she's such a tragic figure. So
yes, I actually really liked her. I liked her so much. That's actually what made me really hate Dagny's brother. What he did to her.
Yeah, I was reading it like, yes, you're getting it. You realize
Yes.
no, don't.
No.
That's why what I'd win nonfiction.
Yeah, it's an interesting point you bring up, because even in her case, like she kind of wants the world to be objectivist. Like she doesn't. Her flaw is that she doesn't see that the world is what she would call altruistic in these horrible ways. And it's not so much that she's living in that world, it's that she doesn't realize that she's living in that world. And as soon as she realizes that, that's when she decides to run into the East River or whatever it is. Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I'm thinking even some of the idea of redemption or any kind of moral turn doesn't exist. Because who's is it Dr. Stadler in Atlas Shrugged, the one that should be able to realize it. The physicist protege of Galt and the other male heroes who should be able to get it, and just gets worse and worse, and at every opportunity just refuses to be redeemed.
Dagny is the closest one in Atlas Shrugged. I think a case could be made for Dominique Francon. I don't know how far you're in Fountainhead, Gold Guy, but I think a case can be made for her because she's not exactly on the Team Rourke on page one. That's sort of a developing thing that only really has its resolution near the end. But I will say two things more about her writing. One, I understand from a Catholic perspective, it makes sense to have heroes to aspire to because, well, Matthew 5:48, be perfect as your father in heaven, as your heavenly Father is perfect. Like that, like we are commanded to try and do that. From a Catholic perspective, or from a Christian, I should say. At least I hope no Christian would deny that. But you never know nowadays. So I understand that. That makes a lot of sense to us. And also, I don't know any other writer who has such a love and capability to describe industrial processes in a beautiful way. Like when she describes factories, it's startling. When she describes the operation of the mind that took to design this and what it does and how it does it. She's the first person who made me appreciate like walls, like the construction of walls when they're in the part where I think when Hank Reardon. Hank Reardon meets Francisco for the first time. They're at a party, and he's looking outside a window, and they talk about like how walls shelter us from the outside, and that it's a product of the mind. And whenever we go to Reardon in his factory, and we describe the industrial process there to make Reardon steel, it's very evocative. And I don't know any other writer who can, sort of convey her love and her view of the beauty of these things and of the mind that produced them.
Yeah, because of Ayn Rand, sometimes every now and then I go out and touch grass, but then I also go and touch concrete instead, and
Yes.
think and think of all the thought, the work, the toil that went into creating something out of this. The planet used to be, depending on which view you take of history, the planet used to be wild, untamed bullshit. Just now, instead of a bunch of broken up rocks lying on the ground, we have buildings that built with ingenuity, effort that no other animal can muster.
Yeah. And Mises talks about this. It's one of his very rare moving passages because he's this very proper Austrian economist. And I think it was Academic Agent who brought this to my attention on one of his streams the other day. But, when we say capital accumulation, it can sound dry and boring. But this is the blood, sweat, and tears of your ancestors. This is thousands and thousands of years of toil, like actual physical hard toil that probably literally broke people's backs, and that required them to think with all they had to make this. And it was probably really, really, really hard. And like, how dare you be ungrateful? This isn't just a dry thing for you to squander away.
Absolutely. Yeah. Any more comments on her writing or on the compromise chapter before I move on? No?
Nope.
Well, Ancash, you're still here? You haven't said anything in a bit. Want to make sure your mic's still working.
I'm still here. Yeah, I'm
okay. Just making sure. Okay then. This next chapter. This is actually one of my favorite chapters. How does one lead a rational life in an irrational society? Belka, if you would you read the opening paragraph for us?
Sure. I will confine my answer to a single fundamental aspect of this question. I will name only one principle, the opposite of the idea, which is so prevalent today and which is responsible for the spread of evil in the world. That principle is one must never fail to pronounce moral judgment. That is the opening paragraph. The second paragraph is actually very good too. Nothing can corrupt and disintegrate a culture or a man's character as thoroughly as does the precept of moral agnosticism. The idea that one must never pass moral judgment on others, that one must be morally tolerant of anything, that the good consists of never distinguishing good from evil.
This is spot on.
Yep. Yes, it's really good.
Incredible. And it's like I have a lot of friends who are more IRL. I don't have any friends online who are more relativists, but IRL, all my friends are more relativists. Oh. And it's cringe talking to sometimes because they'll bring up something morally, and it's actually kind of a funny joke. I had a friend who's a hardcore moral relativist, really a cultural relativist, that every culture has their own morality, and you can only say a culture's morality is bad because you are raised in your culture, and so you can't remove it from your culture to actually do it objectively, so you have to just say all cultures are equally morally equal. We were arguing about rape culture on college campuses, and he was saying how terrible it is. Like, Logan, that's just their culture. That's just their culture.
Yeah,
rape culture
exactly.
on college campus, Logan. You have to accept it.
Yeah, I think
he doesn't know of you anymore, but he did. It's funny.
But this infuses a fundamental point. Like, okay, a gesture of respect is shaking the hands of someone you meet. Well, you can sort of if you think that's the only gesture of respect because you don't know of, like, I don't know, bowing in Japanese culture or whatever, then you sort of think that if they don't do this, this is a lack of respect, and then like a stupid goddamn cultural sociologist or whatever will say, well, no, actually, you see, it's all relative and so on and so forth. When in reality, like, no, they are demonstrating respect by bowing their heads, and if they don't, they're impolite. It's like, and if, you know, they do like a weird hand signal or they look you in the eye for like 5 seconds and then look away, that's the way, like, I don't care. There is a way to do it. And if they don't, then they're being impolite. And maybe I can be stupid and think they're being impolite by my standards, but there is a cross-cultural standards of politeness where we try to understand the other's gesture of politeness. It's not just a blank thing that doesn't exist. It's a gestures of a thing, respect, that does exist. It's just different gestures of it, like different words for respect in different languages.
And those gestures, they still come from our nature. Like there's no culture in which the proper greeting is to punch somebody in the mouth as hard as possible. You know, it's like, well, that's just a culture. Like,
You've never been to Ireland.
I take back my entire point. Objectivism fails. It's entirely relative. Ireland is the counterexample.
Ireland is a great counterexample. Very, very true. Oh man, but yeah, it's a great chapter where she basically talks about you should always be ready to pronounce moral judgment if required, and you don't need to be an asshole about it. But if your silence would be taken to mean assent, you should speak out, because you should never, in public, you should never exhibit anything that could be taken to be agreement with what you consider evil, because then you're corrupting your soul. And she sort of makes this, she makes a very good, like, self-interested argument for, like, okay, taking out any cultural concept of this as well. This is bad for you and your soul because you're sort of rotting it away. You're sort of selling it out piece by piece to just appease others. Instead of like, no. I do believe these things, and I do hold them as true. And if you want, we can discuss them if you're a rational man. She sort of says if you're having a moral disagreement with another rational person, you sort of owe them a conversation. And if it's an irrational person, you can just say, I don't agree with you, and then walk away. I think that's a direct quote. Yeah. So, yeah, she makes a very good self-interested argument for that, I find, as well.
And again, she's so good about she understands something very deep about what is the good, and she appreciates truth as being part of what is good. And I don't know if she explicitly says this, but again, if you don't say something, or someone assumes your assent and assumes something you don't think, that's something evil has happened. If you've misrepresented your views in this way, is that she has a deep respect for truth, and like you say, well, Gov, it's for self-interested reasons, but you are better if you are speaking truth versus if you're speaking falsehood.
Absolutely. I think the next chapter is kind of connected to this one. It is the code of moral greatness. I mean, it's like, I think these chapters are basically very close together. So I don't think we're going to just announce next, but it's going to kind of merge the chapters and continue talking about most of them. That is like the biggest problem with most people is that there is no black and white, evil or good. It's obviously just kind of a shade of gray. What I think. Go ahead.
It's a really, really dumb idea to say that there's no black and white. There's just gray. Gray, the whole concept, is literally a mixture of fucking black and white.
Yes.
You cannot have an in-between of good and evil without good and evil. There is, by definition, good and evil.
Yeah. I like this. I put this. They're all good. They're all goods. They're evils. And some people say, well, there's things like, for example, I know some Protestants who are trying to make this argument that drinking is an evil, not drinking is a good, but you can drink somewhat and not be evil. And I'm just like, well, if it's evil, you shouldn't do it at all. So you put something like drinking into a good, and then doing it correctly is a lesser good. Like they completely like this concept, like I think some things are good that can be corrupted good, but they're all good into themselves still. It's a lesser good. And a lot of people seem to lack the idea that you can have something that is that could be harmful done properly is still a good if it is not a intrinsically evil act. There's no good form of lying.
Go ahead.
Oh no, I wasn't gonna say anything. I was just saying,
This is that golden mean argument or discussion we were having earlier. Is that okay, like some amount of alcohol can be okay, too much can be bad. There's a happy medium. But that doesn't apply to transcendentals. Being is not, there's not an ideal amount of good versus evil that you should have. There's not an ideal amount of truth versus falsity. There's not an ideal amount of being versus not being. The transcendentals are good of themselves, and other things, okay, there can be a proper amount for it that's good for your nature, but being itself is good. More of it is better. There's not okay, well, you were too good, and that was too much good, so you should have had less good in you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I can sort of understand the Protestant argument, but if you say drinking is evil, then you sort of like, yeah, then you shouldn't do it. But if you say there's better things you could do, then you're like, okay, you can drink a bit because drinking isn't evil. It can be even good in certain situations, but it would be even better if you did so and so. It'd be the equivalent of a Catholic view of the more perfect path of a saint or a monk, rather than the perfectly good path of a married couple or someone who decides to be celibate like a priest. We describe it as a more perfect path, but it's we don't say that the other path isn't perfect as well if it's adhered to all the rules and so on and so forth. But I can read the penultimate paragraph, which is really, really good, where she talks about grayness in people. Like a mixed economy, men of mixed premises may be called gray, but in both cases the mixture does not remain gray for long. Gray, in this context, is merely a prelude to black. There may be gray men, but there can be no gray moral principles. Morality is a code of black and white. When and if men attempt to compromise, it is obvious which side will necessarily lose and which will profit. Such are the reasons why, when one is asked, surely you don't think in terms of black and white, do you? The proper answer, in essence, if not informed, should be, you're damn right I do. Which I think is she's a good writer, and she sort of invents her. You can see really good rhetorical devices that she uses. It's very impressive.
That just reminds me of a really weird conversation, just to show the absolute straight up honest stupidity of some people is when someone said to me, do you see things in black and white? And I said, yes. And then she said, you've got to have some gray in there. And I'm like, why?
Well,
that's just what she said. You have to have some gray. No explanation. No actual argument. Just a plea to not be seen as weak. Just to have some kind of sanction to be told that that's okay. It's okay that you don't try to be as good as you can be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's sort of the argument of intimidation as well. It's like, surely if you do, it's obvious that gray must exist as a moral value. Anyone who doesn't think so is immoral.
Yeah, I have a lot of more of a rant I want to go off on when we get to the argument for more intimidation, because I deal with that a lot from all my IRL liberal relativist friends, and it is. See, like I was reading this chapter, and I'm like, this is exactly what I needed to hear, and exactly like it should be said more. And I would, if it was, it's actually so true. It actually should be classified as a logical fallacy, the argument for intimidation. Like that should be a legit thing that is classified regularly, because that's a lot of people, specifically nowadays, use that a lot.
Yeah.
So something occurred to me, and it's kind of crazy, but I'm going to try and do it. I think I can make a Randian case from this for Christianity, or for and it goes back because I think Golga made a really good point earlier in light of this about how there's no real positive moral arcs in Rand's fiction. Is no one chooses the evil and then repents or then becomes good, and it's for the reason that she describes here. Is as soon as you make that compromise, you're going to slide into black. And I think you could make an argument metaphysically. The only way you sort of get out of that loop is you need a redeemer. Yeah. You need something that can take you out of, okay, well, I've managed to compromise my principles. Something needs to put you back into God's good graces realistically. And because she doesn't have that, because her metaphysics doesn't have a redeemer, positive moral arcs aren't really part of her philosophy. Is if you compromise your values, you were sliding down that slope and nothing's going to turn you around. Yeah.
All her heroes are temporarily embarrassed Giga Chads at worst. They're never like the farm boy who goes on a quest.
What were you saying, Go Guy?
Yeah.
She would probably argue that the only one who can pull yourself out of that slide is yourself. We don't really see that, of course, in her fiction. All we see is her characters in Atlas Shrugged, for example, eventually realizing that they should not be supporting the system and that they should then leave. But that's hardly someone starting as evil and then choosing good.
Or starting as even just gray, because Dagny already she basically runs the whole company herself at that point. By page 30, she's running the whole company. Her brother is a worthless CEO. She does basically everything she's just she's a temporarily wrong Giga Chad. She's she's sort of wrong. She doesn't start as the farm boy. She just is a badass from page 1.
No, her growth is only intellectual. There's no moral development really in Dagny. She sort of learns things that she didn't realize previously, and it takes her some time. But there's no moral arc that she goes through where she was deliberately choosing the bad and rejects it. And again, I don't think it's a coincidence. I don't think it's a coincidence that we don't see that in Rand's fiction.
So I have nothing to say when it comes to this book on the rights, collectivized rights, stuff on government. I mean,
I will say there's good stuff in there. We've been at this for a while, and I think there's not a whole lot that she says there. I don't think she says a whole lot there that isn't covered by other. She's in line with a lot of sort of libertarian minarchist thinkers and says good things, but it's not. There's nothing in there that's profoundly objectivist and profoundly different than what a lot of people that are watching us probably have already heard.
You'll get all of this if you just read any decent libertarian thinker, basically.
Pretty much.
With your audience, I mean, the audience is already autistic enough to probably know this.
There's no need to go over it. It's just gonna look like we're rehashing, I don't know, the non-anarchist sections of Ethics of Liberty. That's what it's gonna look like.
It's also just going to be really. It's probably going to be really confused meandering from me because I went minarchist to ANCAP to now post-libertarian that I really don't know what the fuck to call it aside from post-libertarian. At one point I can give a really impassioned speech for the abolition of all government as to why we need liberty, and then when a principled libertarian opens their mouth, I'll just suddenly jump on them and talk about using the power of the state to crush them. And
same.
It'll just end up with serious rhetorical whiplash.
So that sounds like Rand's minarchism.
I guess the Catholic analogy to this is that some judgments are absolute, like the moral values of the Catholic Church and what we think are God's commandments, and some judgments are prudential. They're subject to error and they're more what we do in our day to day and what the Catholic Church thinks we should do, or as an economic or political suggestion, and that might be wrong. That's subject to error. We don't claim the Holy Spirit moves for us in those moments. So if that be my analogy, it's like I still subscribe to the normative claims of the libertarians, but there are matters that, as I think it was Radlib Stephen Carson, has a few articles on Mises.org, who sort of says, Encapistan is an ideal type, which I subscribe to, but it's the mature fruit of civilization. It doesn't just come from nowhere. Yeah. It doesn't just spring up.
Yeah, that guy's great.
He's really good.
I might get bullied for this, but I still hold on to hope that one day Ancapistan is actually possible. On the other hand, I'm also black-pilled as fuck, so bring on the culture war.
Yeah, I'm not. I guess this is probably one of the biggest, day-to-day benefits outside of prayer and mass from reversion to Catholicism. It's like, the Israelites had very really really bad kings, and even their wise kings usually committed adultery and killed people. So, our happy ending is not going to be in this world. But if it happens, I'll be very glad. And I'll probably not experience it, but I'll be glad for whatever descendants of mine and even my non-descendants that I get to experience this. And I'll be very, very happy for them.
Absolutely. Before we wrap up, does anybody have anything they want to say on the chapter on racism?
That was an interesting one.
Yeah.
I'm going to be honest, 2 years ago when I read it, I thought that was just like, it's very whatever. I was like, okay, it's a good argument, but I basically already accepted this in my worldview. So I have to say it's interesting.
I messaged Caleb a bit about it right afterward, and trying to go over my own arguments again. Particular, her racism essay, right, when she talks about states' rights, she I find it to be quite contradictory, because she sees the solution, she sees the way to supporting individuals' rights is to trample the right of southern, in this case, states, to make their own laws, to just impose federal tyranny. And actually, objectivism as a whole, I find that it's quite ironic that Ayn Rand idolized America, the United States, so much, when her political system seems to tend so much towards a centralization of laws rather than federalism or any kind of decentralism. As she explicitly states that that a good country would have the same set of laws applying to everything, which I think is a very naive political theory.
Yes.
That decentralization is really the answer to this.
There are quite a few objectivist globalists that I've seen.
Yeah, no, the objectivist utopia is, a benign worldwide minarchist state. That is the objectivist utopia. It has to be worldwide, because if it's not, then if the state is has laws which objectivists consider better, it would be better if others were under its protection. We sort of have to admit this.
Yeah.
I think, we talked about nationalism last time I was on Caleb's podcast, and how this brings us to tribalism, for example. How Ayn Rand rightly talks against racism, but then she brings in tribalism as well and says tribalism is always bad, and I used to subscribe to that. But now I think there's actual social evolutionary purpose to tribalism. There is a reason as to why we have tribalism, and this links back to talking about nationalism, that I think it's orders of there's layers to identity. First there is the individual, someone should prioritize themselves. Then there's the family, someone should prioritize their own family over other families. Community, region, nation, and that brings us to nationalism. Ayn Rand talks about irrational patriotism, for one. I'm not sure quite how far that would apply for her, though.
Scruton talks about this. He doesn't make the evolutionary argument because he's a very sort of Kantian guy, and he doesn't want to use teleology necessarily to make the case. But he makes the moral case that outside of a biological species of persons and what evolution comes to bear, we are also moral persons. And moral persons, which is our moral species, develop responsibilities to others. You have higher responsibilities to your spouse and to your children, to some guy in Russia. You just do, because you don't know that guy. You have built no relationship with them. There is no chain of responsibility binding you to him. Now, if that guy was in front of you and he was I don't know, for some reason someone knocked him unconscious and he's drowning in a puddle, and you could save him by moving his arm, you sort of have a responsibility as one person to another to do that, but nothing beyond that, beyond something that would be it's in your way, you have to do this to save this other subject from something that poses no threat to you. But outside from that, there's an argument for you should care about your tribe. It shouldn't necessarily be the tribe that was given to you. For example, if in the United States you don't necessarily need to care about everyone in the United States. Maybe you want to decentralize. You don't want some of these tribes are arbitrarily chosen, but some of them are not. They're chosen as moral people, and some of them are given on or thrusted upon you not only as your biological kind, but as your moral kind, just for your everyday interactions, and the fact that you were raised usually by two people who sort of took responsibility on you and just developed your change of responsibility to them, unless they really gravely mistreated you in some manner. And even then, usually people still find they have some responsibility to them.
Absolutely. Anything any more? Final takeaway before we wrap up. One at a time. Eincast. Final takeaway.
So the one thing that I want to get into, because I think hopefully to Golgai's appreciated that there's a lot of appreciation for Rand's work and the good things that she says, because there's a lot of good in what she does. And one thing that we haven't really talked about is wrapping it back into the Christian ethic that she sort of misses out on. Is that if you have this sort of longer term view of your value, and you have an immortal soul that you would like to be in heaven at some point, her ethics still sort of works in that case. If you are your own highest good, the best thing you can do for yourself is be saved, is to make it to heaven. And we are fortunate that the thing that is best for us in that case is the good, is doing good by ourselves in that more grand sense, is the thing that maximizes good, that we try and do the most good in the world that we can. And so I think that what she's missing is that lack of understanding. Okay, that there's, if there is, or maybe understanding is the wrong word, doesn't have an appreciation for a life beyond this one, that there is something more that I can achieve for myself beyond this life. I think with that perspective, and then understanding what it is that you have, that is required of you to achieve that, a lot of her ethics still makes a lot of sense. Is that I can still try and maximize myself. The way I do it is there's more to me to maximize than what is in this life.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Boca, final takeaway?
I really like Rand. I would usually recommend her for young men, like 18 to 21, who are like, want to get started into philosophy, and you sort of want to read something shorter and easier to read, and that is well written, but still has some rigor and will introduce new concepts to you. Then Rand's a really good start if you don't want to get into a proper introductory book to philosophy. Rand's a good start, and you might develop a passion. And if you don't, at least you'll have some basic libertarian ethics, which is not the worst place to start. And because she's not a libertarian, you probably won't end up as a Lolbert. Just pray you don't end up like Yaron Brook. So just pray you don't start justifying Hiroshima. Aside from that, like, you're good.
Yeah, Rand was the first philosopher I ever read, and I think Leonard Peikoff's like 12-part series he has on YouTube, The Objectivist Philosophy. I think that's the first. Rand that was like the first philosophy I knew who Rand was before I knew who Aquinas was.
Yeah.
And so I really like Rand was a great start. I think Rand was a good starting point because it gave me enough stuff to go off of that was true, but enough stuff that I could disagree with that I could find. I kept looking for more answers.
Yeah, I've still read more words that Rand wrote than Aquinas, because I've read The Fountain and Atlas Shrugged. And Atlas Shrugged is one of the 10 biggest novels ever written. So I've still read technically more Rand than Aquinas.
So I don't want to delay things too much, but something I find interesting, because I found Rand a little bit later in my philosophical development, and it's surprising to hear that. Start with Rand, because I sort of think, if you start with Rand, you sort of end up getting pulled in a little too deep, and then it's hard can be hard to find your way out.
Yeah,
I'm curious, Caleb, saying that you read Rand first, and I know Golgai, you sort of are starting to veer away from that. Because my perspective is it was a really nice thing for me to find later in life, after I'd already read a lot of things, after I had read some Aquinas, after I had my understanding of the faith was better developed, my understanding of some other things was better developed, and this really sort of helped make those more concrete. I'm curious about people that start with Rand, how you sort of veer away from her intelligently.
For me, it was like there are a few things you would say that I just could not understand or couldn't. I didn't agree. I just knew I don't think that's accurate. So me to see what he recommended, so that led me to Aristotle, because he kept talking about him. So I read Aristotle, and I found out about Aquinas. So I'm like, okay, well, if Aristotle led to Aquinas, and Aquinas was one of his the way I viewed it, there's two schools of thought that evolved out of Aristotelianism, was Objectivism and the Scholastics. And so let me go read the other ones. That's how I found Aquinas and kind of got deep in everything else over there. And so it was just tracing back to Aristotle, and from Aristotle building back up again.
I veered away from Rand when I just saw that I didn't think that it entirely worked. I think more than anyone I've ever read, Ayn Rand saw the world for what it was and applied and acted based on that, but did not have it exactly right. I mean, there's, in the political sense, I went from minarchist to ANCAP, and then in the moral sense, I don't know everything. I just don't think, in my experience, that the objectivist ethic applied 100% necessarily leads to the results that it wants. the same as politically. I will always owe a huge intellectual debt to Ayn Rand because she basically taught me to be a human being, and to quote someone I respect, he said, I think Ayn Rand was the first author I read who actually believed in me. And Ayn Rand does that. It's a huge fucking white pill to read Ayn Rand. She taught me that the standard I'd been looking for, something to believe in, to support, to strive towards, that standard is my own life. And that I should not be ashamed of my own happiness, and that I should not be ashamed to be a human being, and that my nature is not to suffer and toil, but to actually feel joy, and I'm working on that, and it actually feels possible.
Yeah, I also read Rand fairly young, so when I was, I think, 18, I think I finished Atlas Shrugged in 3 weeks. It took longer to read The Fountainhead, actually, because that's the only thing I read, and I usually read like 4 different books at the same time, or keep juggling between them. But it's actually not fair to say that's where I started. That would be the first moral philosopher, as in what you should do. But I had read the entirety of Ethics of Liberty, a lot of Mises' economic essays, and the entirety of Democracy, and I like most of what Hoppe wrote. So I'd read the Economics and Ethics of Private Property. I read Democracy That Got That Failed. I've read his bunch of other essays. Great Fiction of a free edition hadn't come out yet, so I hadn't read that. But I read a bunch of his other essays. I read his epistemology stuff, like economic science and the Austrian method. So I was relatively deep into epistemology. I was going and reading other essays on that, but I hadn't really read a moral philosopher. So outside of the libertarian Rothbardian view of essentially, it's essentially a legal theory, right? It's not exactly a moral theory. So outside of that, she was the first one I read, and then because I sort of had this out to disagree with her politically, and I sort of, wasn't drawn in by the objectivist cult. They didn't snare me in. I could say, okay, this makes some really good points. I should investigate this. And this really taught me to value my life, and that, I shouldn't waste it away on stupid stuff. And so I'm going to read other people. And, that led me to Scruton, which led me to Augustine, Peter Abelard, and Aquinas. And that's when I reverted to Catholicism. So I have a lot to thank her for as well.
Gold guy, final takeaway.
Final takeaway: Ayn Rand got a lot right. Was my introduction to philosophy. Was my introduction to really life that's not suffering. Ayn Rand's help to me personally is invaluable, and The Virtue of Selfishness is a very good collection of essays with some very interesting things to consider that obviously the three of you don't entirely agree with, that I don't entirely agree with. She is, I think people ignore Rand at their own peril. She is dismissed by far too many. And even, the next book I'm going to read is 5 Proofs of the Existence of God. So that's going to be some pretty serious whiplash. But I think I'm actually very happy to see how much Ayn Rand is appreciated, even, for example, among Catholics.
I think we might be outliers, though. I will say that.
I think Finn Horn's a fan of her, I believe, which is this one talk to him even more. But
it probably is a short look. Are we can go back for when we do Phaser? We're gonna do a roundtable for that. I'm excited.
I would love to do a roundtable.
Yeah, I'm 1/3 of the way through. I'm annotating it, so we can later. Actually, I don't even need to annotate it because Phaser at the end of the informal quote unquote presentation of each argument, he then says, okay, these are the 50 steps of the argument, each one enumerated. So we can actually say, okay, I have a difficulty. That's step 35. It's literally 50, by the way, at the end of each chapter. And then I think that's only 2/3 of the book. The last 100 are dealing with even more specific objections, because he deals with objections in each chapter as well. And then he also says, how can a God, which is this type, this not exactly a Christian God, which I've argued for, can do miracles and can intervene in the world in the manner that Christians believe. So that would be, I think, the last 1/3 of the book. The first 2/3 are the existence of God itself.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to doing that one on here. I don't really have a final takeaway. I will say yesterday, reading this book, I posted a poll and I said, if Ayn Rand had a god, would it be reason or herself? And the poll ended with herself winning by 70%. I think that was interesting to see that play out. But
I'd actually disagree. I think her god would be the idea of a Howard Rourke or a Hank Reardon.
Yeah.
Or John Galt.
Yeah, John Galt, objectivist Jesus.
Yeah, John Galt. Yeah, because
Absolutely.
I think Michael Malice made a point in one of his interviews, maybe with Lex, where like she really did worship this sort of masculine figure, this sort of platonic form of the perfect masculine intellect and person. She really did.
I would somewhat see start her philosophy because the only other philosopher who gave a description of what a good man would be what a Superman would be was Nietzsche, and he couldn't stand with how he describes it. He kind of he wanted to create a fiction that would have these Supermen that you could look up to and admire, and use as like a guide point for your life. He's hated a lot of other philosophers for not offering that example of what a good guy would be, and so I think you can really see it in her fictional writing with her characters. But anyway, this is the end of the show. I'm going to give the plugs. Go first. What are your plugs?
By the time you look up my account, it might be banned already. This is my 5th one.
Oh no!
This one's actually lasted a lot longer than it should. Some guy said, "Yeah, it's been like 4 gold guys already." Yeah, I started measuring time in my account lifespan. So right now it's at BullionBoy22. I've cycled through quite a few. There's been Gold Guy, Silver Soldier, Metal Man. Every time I get banned, I come up with a new pun or alliteration. So hopefully I'm still around when you decide to follow my autistic ass.
If wants to follow too, and if you guys find it, I'm not gonna give it away, but he does run a parody account that is the funniest thing on the website. He's had some threads with a parody account that has me dying of laughter.
Wait, which parody account?
I'll send you a link to it afterwards.
Oh, okay. I did not know this.
The best parts about the parody account, people sometimes don't know it's a parody account. He posted 15 long tweet thread. And I'm reading it, and I was like, I literally could not breathe because it was so funny. It was the funniest thing I've ever read on Twitter.
Yeah, send me the link later. That sounds awesome.
I will absolutely send it to you. Eincast, what are your plugs?
Reveal the name to no one. That remains a secret.
See in the group chat. Yeah, so at Eincath on Twitter, anarchocatholic.substack.com, and now officially a writer for Austro Thomism.
Absolutely.
Cool.
Volkov, what are your plugs?
I'm at available username on Twitter, spelled weirdly. Just type in Bulgakov, spam off, and hope you find me. I am you can go to Austro Thomism. You find me there. I have 2 articles published as of now. Starting to work on a 3rd one. Nice. I'm in between several topics. But it might be Jacques Maritain's pre-philosophic approach to God. Might maybe something I cover because it's not that dense and it's fairly easy to. Well, I say it fairly easy, but it's Jacques Maritain. It's fairly short. It's not that long, despite Maritain's French use of language. Let's say. Yes. If you imagine a French philosopher use writing, that's exactly how Maritain writes, except he's a Catholic scholastic. That's the only difference.
It is great. His first chapter in the Degrees of Knowledge and the Beauty of Metaphysics is a beautiful chapter. I just wish it was like go from that to Phase. Like Phase is so much easier to read.
Yes.
It's just so much more plain. Anyway, Austro Thomism on Twitter at Austro Thomism. The website is still under www.paleothomism.com. We have relabeled. I have not bought a new domain name yet. I don't know how to. I'm gonna get that fixed eventually. I'm on Twitter at CalebBrown549. All the links everyone listed is in the description, so make sure you go and get there to follow us. Go to the website, read the articles. Yeah. Anyway, have a good night.